Good morning. I am Dr. Alvita Green, Chair of the Legislative Committee for the Virginia Beach City School Board Committee. Present with me this morning in the school board chambers as I call this meeting for October the 3rd to order is, to my left, Mrs. Rose Dreyer and Mrs. Melinda Rogers, who are also members of our legislative committee. May I get a motion for adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
I second it for now.
All right, thank you. The first item of business is old business, and at our last meeting, we also had made a request, so thank you, Ms. Matheson, for providing us with a listing of unfunded mandates.
No problem. I just wanted to give y'all an update on those. So the different departments went through them to double check to make sure that they actually were still active or still needed it on the list, updated number wise and that kind of thing. So it did take them a good chunk of time to go through that just to make sure it's accurate. And we do have Miss Tiffany Jacobs here if you have any questions about them as you went through it.
All right, thank you. Ms. Dreyer or Ms. Rogers, do either of you have any questions for Ms. Jacobson?
I did. So in looking at these, I know that there is a lot of different price points with regard to all of these. And thinking about it, these are going to come out of different portions of our budget. So I think if we want to discuss like what we want to ask for the General Assembly to possibly cover, we may want to know, like, budget-wise, like, what we're talking about. I don't know if we're going to be able to get that information today, but I think that it would be important to understand which part of the budget, like, that these things are going to be coming from if we pay for them. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Ms. Dreyer, do you have anything else to add with regards to unfunded mandates?
So it was my understanding that we were to pick one. Is that still in effect? How does that work?
What I understand last week was that, last meeting was that Mrs. Rogers to suggest maybe after looking at the unfunded mandates, that you might find one that you might have some commonality with the other school divisions in Region Two, and you might be able to gather some strength on this. I know I talked with Ms. Jacobs yesterday. She had one idea, which was, I thought was interesting, on impact aid. Now, impact aid is really a federal concept, and that has to do with the military compensating you for the lack of tax dollars due to the amount of federal land that we have here. And Ms. Jacobs suggested maybe might want to look in that area to see if that's an area we can do a little bit more lobbying on to get in that. I'm not sure if you have an interest in any of the other unfunded mandates. Those would be things we talked about. Now, again, that impact aid is federal. It's not going to be the General Assembly legislative package, but also impacts us significantly.
Right, anyone else? Any other questions, comments with regards to unfunded mandates?
You gotta turn that on, though. There we go.
Thank you.
No worries.
Follow-up question to you, Ms. Rogers. When you asked for information on which part of the budget these funds were coming from, what specific information are you looking for? Because
Well, if-
generally, these all items are coming out of our operating budget.
Right, but like, obviously, our operating budget, we have different sections as to, where we have to, take the money from.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of curious as to like, where these things are coming out of our operating
So
budget.
what departments
Yes,
essentially are paying
and,
these?
and,
Okay.
yeah, where the impacts are gonna be, only because if there's something that is, has a higher impact, that might also be part of our consideration where, we were getting funding for this from this source and we're not anymore, and so if we have the state then help us with this, this mandate, then it would help our budget overall. That was just my thought.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Jacobson. Our next item on the agenda, if you recall, at our last meeting, we discussed, confirming a date for our General Assembly, delegation breakfast. And I see that it is being proposed for December 4th, 2025. And Mrs., I would assume Woodhouse or Ms. Matheson, do you have anything to add about the breakfast? I know you're probably still working on a location, or have we firmed that up as well?
I know you had said something about Bayside the last time. Is that still your
Yes.
number one choice?
It is.
Okay. I will reach out and see if they are able to hold us there that day. If not, is there a second follow-up choice?
I defer to staff for that.
Okay. I think we said 8:30 last time.
Yes, we have. And I know in the past, we try to start as early as possible.
And normally I handle all the invitation stuff and make sure all that is good to go, so y'all don't have to worry about that.
Thank you. All right, and to members of the committee, do you have any questions or comments with regards to the date of December 4th for our legislative breakfast?
I had already put that in my calendar, so I'm good.
I would say, Dr. Green, you probably want to let the other school board members know fairly quickly so they can block it on their
I
schedules
will.
too.
Thank you. All right, our next item is, at our last meeting, as we started to discuss possibly recommendations for our legislative delegation to the General Assembly. One was the reauthorization of the recovery school, because right now, I believe funds for that end in June of 20.
You had a 2-year grant, it was on the appropriations bill, and
Okay.
it will come to end on June 30th of 2026. We've been working with the Virginia Department of Education, we were working more in the spring, as to whether it would qualify as a joint school. They did not want to take that position. they said we should rely on the General Assembly's funding bill, so it's another issue we kind of have to continue to work with. But to be on the safe side, I think we should see if we can get somebody to make sure it goes back in the appropriations bill. Now, Chesterfield has had a recovery school for longer than we have, and they have reauthorized that in the past, and so if we could get something to some of that, that would hold us over. The other choice is to seek an actual placement in the law for it. Ms. Jacobs and I were actually talking about this the other day. She's seeing under some of the alternative, innovative programs that put recovery schools, that's a possibility, but we need to make sure you have authorization to continue to run. So again, it didn't seem to be a problem getting the appropriations bill last time, so we just need to make sure we've got a backup plan for how that's going to be handled.
All right, thank you.
I have a quick question. Mrs. Linetti, you said the 2-year grant ends June 30th. If we're seeking, this in the appropriations committee, that includes the grants then to fund it?
That would be a discussion we were going to need to have with who's ever sponsoring the bill. We do have grant funding currently planned out for that under the Virginia opioid abatement funding that's out there. So that's how they're planning to fund in the next couple of years. But we are currently relying this year on the money from the General Assembly for that. So I'm not clear, and I don't know if Mr. Andrews says, I thought whether appropriations bill has to have money with it or it can just have an authorization.
Oh, thank you. I have to phone a friend on using these mics. Ms. Linda, I think you can do language only in the Appropriations Act that would be authorizing. So that would be one possibility, or I think a standalone legislation could also be a possibility, creating clarification. I think either pathway could probably work, and we can sort of start to having those discussions and figure out maybe which is the preferred method. Typically, though, I mean, there's plenty of places in the budget where it is language only, not associated with necessarily a appropriation of dollars. So that is not entirely out of the ordinary, I would say.
And we, as structured right now, we are planning to fund it for the next 5 years through a combination of the Virginia opioid abatement, funding, grant, matching sources coming out from the 5 participating cities in it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be money. Obviously, any additional money is useful for us, but we do have a plan if we don't have General Assembly money.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion? Ms. Dryer? Ms. Rogers?
Nothing.
All right, that takes care of old business. Let's move down to new business. Mr. Andrus, you are first up with the 2026 Virginia General Assembly.
Dr. Green, I would say right now, I don't think there's a whole lot new to report on since we last met a few weeks ago. So we are still moving very quickly towards January. And obviously with elections coming up in the near future, I think most certainly House members are focused on those things right now. The work that we've kind of been discussing ongoing related to legislation pertaining to students with diabetes is still out there. The School Health Services Committee is continuing to discuss that. And then also with the Commission on Youth continuing their study on special education dispute resolution continues. And those will start to continue their recommendations to the full General Assembly. So but really, at this point, I don't think there's a whole lot new to report other than what we have already been discussing.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Dryer or Ms. Rogers, any additional comments or questions right now?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Ms. Dryer? All right, the next item, the VSBA legislative agenda. A couple of months ago, during the summer, I did forward the upcoming proposed position that the VSBA has with regards to some topics. And Ms. Matheson, thank you very much for preparing the very detailed packet of information from the VSBA for us. So at this time, floor is open for any questions or comments with regards to the VSBA legislative agenda. And for our viewing public, the VSBA is the Virginia School Board Association.
Dr. Green, if I can explain some of the process, because
Yes.
what may come up with, there are school board members who have dealt with this process in the past. The Virginia School Board Association has a pretty lengthy position statement that they have out there. Their process is they usually take information during the spring and June, proposals to change that or add something to the legislative positions. They bring that to a meeting during the summer, decide what they want. It will then show up at their annual meeting, which is November 19th or 20th in Williamsburg. You have a delegate on each school board has a delegate on there. They would go in there and speak to that. And that is your opportunity to look at the proposed changes. We have not actually seen anything right now as to what they're going to put in that packet. We've been looking for it, so we can't tell you what would be new. The positions don't change significantly. It's a pretty lengthy document to look at, but that would be the opportunity for your representative to vote against it. If they wanted to propose something, generally you do that during the summer, so you're a little late. Additions right now generally aren't entertained unless they're coming from the floor. If the entire voting delegation at the Virginia School Board Association annual meeting votes to approve this and a school board disagrees with the position, all you have to do is you can come back as a school board and say, that's not our position. So you could vote afterwards at any particular time. You're not bound by it. That just becomes the consensus vote at the Virginia School Board Association. So in the past, the school board has looked at doing that. They've disagreed with a certain position on it. So again, if you don't get the change you want, if you want to change in there, you just come back afterwards. So there may be we've seen this where, certain members of our board disagreed with things, and they tried to bring that to the school board to make a decision. They may direct your delegate to vote against something. We've seen that happen before, but no, at this point, it's probably too late to add anything to their packet because they usually do that during the summer. Not that you can't try that, but you would have to, school board would have to vote before that November 19th meeting so that your delegate knows what you want that delegate to do at the meeting. Otherwise, once that's voted in, and if the board disagrees, that you can bring it back in the December meeting, January meeting, look at it, and make a different decision. If you don't agree as a board on that position, you would just vote on that, and that would become your position on it.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion at this time on the VSBA legislative agenda? All right, if not, we'll move on to item C. Earlier this week, I did receive a request from our school board member, Mr. David Culpepper, to add to our legislative agenda with regards to taking a position on collective bargaining. So at this time, I would like to open up that for discussion. Who would like to start? And I'll save my comments for last. Stryer?
I'll start. Yes, we need to take a position on collective bargaining. I think it's something we cannot afford, and it's dangerous, in my opinion. And Mrs. Linetti, if you would comment, please, on the current divisions that have engaged in collective bargaining and what the outcomes have been. Thank you.
I did a presentation a number of years ago to the school board on collective bargaining when the legislation first came out. Right now, it's a choice that you get to make at this point. There were bills in the General Assembly last year that did not get in. There's a potential they could come back this year. They'll need some work that happens. There is a significant cost to doing it. There are school divisions, Prince William is one I know their attorney pretty well. They spent a lot of money on that. That was a pretty expensive proposition to do because it does require hiring staff and developing a program for it. So it is not without cost to do a collective bargaining. Smaller school divisions, believe it was Arlington did it without a whole lot of cost, and I'm not sure if it's Fairfax City. One of the smaller school divisions has done it. So some school divisions have done it and not had significant issues with it. I know larger school divisions, because of the requirements that are generally involved, you're going to end up having to hire a staff. It does require to enter into a collective bargaining agreement. There's election procedures. Most school divisions end up having to hire specialized outside counsel to do this because of the complications involved. So if this would be something the school board wants to do, you really do need to plan and budget for it because it is a very expensive proposition to implement. And then after that, you would have to decide what it is you want to do. Currently, the way the legislation's written, a collective bargaining cannot obligate your funds. And because Virginia is a state where you're required to have a balanced budget, you have to be extremely careful with budgeting issues. So right now, the collective bargaining legislation does not allow you to commit to funding matters, but you can commit to other things. That could obviously change if a bill came through the General Assembly and changed it. So right now, it is your choice as to whether you would do it. And there's a procedure by which you would do that. And there are some limitations as to what collective bargaining would allow. Based on the legislation as it is. Should further legislation come through, we'd have to pay more attention to it. But I do warn you, it is not without cost, and there are limitations. So you really need to study what will happen if you were to implement collective bargaining, what you're limited in doing. If you have not dealt with a collective bargaining situation, I would strongly suggest you talk with your colleagues in one of those school divisions that has implemented to see what the limitations are, what the advantages are that they've seen with it, because it's a pretty lengthy, complicated program. I know Prince William, when I talked with their attorney, it took the better part of like 2 years or so to even reach the agreement that they wanted to do. It's that complicated with a lot of work that has to be done, and then they're still trying to implement some of the aspects of it. So it's a pretty big culture shift once you do that, and it's a commitment of funding that you need to make sure you've got into your budget and the staffing issue that's going to be required to do it.
Kim, I have a question. With regard to the funding piece, this has gone through the legislation in the last 2 years and been vetoed, but should something pass in the spring that wouldn't commit our budget until the following year, we wouldn't have to make those decisions until then? Is that my understanding? Or would it be immediate?
I would hope they wouldn't do it immediately because, well, even if they did it immediately, the way you do collective bargaining is you end up having to do a resolution, or you either choose to open it up or an organization comes to you and says, we would like you to entertain this. You have to go through a resolution process, then there's a whole process for electing that body, which is going to represent whoever you're allowing collective bargaining for. So you can do one organization that does collective bargaining for all your employees. You could break it into groups, and so there are different elections and things that have to happen, and and then you enter into these agreements. So I would hope you wouldn't attempt to do that immediately, just because you're not going to have enough time to plan for it.
Well, but that's, I guess, my point is that it would take time, so I don't understand the need to take a position immediately if we haven't, if nothing's gone through, we aren't facing this right now, it's not been a position that the board has taken one way or another for the last 2 years. If it's still our ability to remain autonomous, I don't understand the need to make a position one way or another when we haven't done so up to this point, and there's nothing right now saying that we have to do anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the legislation right now gives you the choice. So, and you've not, when we talked about it a couple of years ago, the decision at that time was not the best explanation, but open the door to it. You would not entertain it. Not that somebody couldn't propose, a group couldn't come to you. You just weren't going to say, we're now doing collective bargaining, please submit. That would be how you would handle that. So right now, the way the legislation is, I think it works well for you and that you have the choice. We would have to pretty carefully look at any other legislation coming in. I think at all costs, you want to protect your ability to make the best decisions for your employees and work with you. And that goes across the board in any of your employment
Yeah.
areas. You don't want, your community well enough. You know your
Yeah.
staffing. So you want to protect any law that comes out should allow you to make the best decisions for how you're going to handle your staff and your community. That's what you want to protect. and look at that. You do not want to be forced to do something that, works well in another part of the state, may not work well here. So you want that autonomy. So, and there are other types of laws and things that could affect that, that also affect your employment relationships and things, and you also want to protect those issues. You gotta take a look at that. You want, as a school board, to make the best decision for this community.
So I guess my question is should they have, the legislature decide that they want to make changes, we would still have the ability to communicate back and forth with our legislator on that without having to come out with some statement at this time. 'Cause,
Yes, and
we
I would
don't-
think you're gonna want to keep very close eyes on that
Right, but
legislation, no
we're
matter
n-
whether you take a position or not, you
Right,
do need
but
to
I
keep an
feel
eye on
like
that.
it's kind of, to put it in our package seems a little bit premature to me, because we don't know what's gonna be changing, or if anything at all. We have no idea what's coming, and up to this point, we have autonomy, and I'm fine with that. Does that make sense? Like,
And that's certainly one choice. As written now, it's up to you to make those decisions.
Right.
You cannot be forced to do that.
so that's why I'm kind of like, I don't understand the need to change that at the moment. We don't have any indication that anything in the legislature is going to be changing, other than what we already have. So just keeping it as is seems to be prudent, and we're not, I just don't see the need to include it in the legislative package, on things that, like, we have no idea what's gonna happen, and we're not anticipating any big changes to the legislation, I don't think. Am I wrong on that?
There was a pretty significant bill that went through last year that got vetoed. I don't know, obviously it will depend on the results of the election coming out. You
Right.
do want to keep an eye on that in case that's brought back this year, because it needs some work. There were some issues with those bills, in there, so there's a possibility that that could be resurrected depending on what happens in the election, but again, you would still have the opportunity while that bill's going
Right.
through to comment on it, and that bill had some significant issues to it that you really do need to take a look at if that comes through. It didn't really seem to go anywhere last year, well, got up far enough to be vetoed by this point, but you do want to keep an eye on whatever bills are. So whether you take a position or not, you still will have to have that opportunity when the bill is up
Right.
in committee or going up, before any of the bodies.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to comment again as well. I do think we need to take a position. I think it needs to come to the board for discussion and a vote, because I feel very strongly that that's the wise thing to do in this current forecast and what we're dealing with, especially our division right now. I think it does need to come to the board for discussion. So I agree with Mr. Culpepper's request. And I want to add, the governor vetoed it, and I thought the VSBA was against it as well. They're not in agreement with it, or they don't support it.
I know that they weren't supporting that bill. I don't know if I know what their exact position is on collective bargaining. I'd have to look through the legislative, but that bill had a lot of problems.
Based on your remarks, Ms. Linetti, and in a moment, I'll be interested in hearing Mr. Andrus' perspective on all of this as well. I think it's important, that we wait in terms of what direction, because we don't know what's forthcoming in the future. Again, to reiterate what has already been said, I think we need to remain neutral as a school division so that we can have autonomy. Also, because we don't want the legislator to have control over our regulations regarding contracts. So my recommendation would be at this point that we take a position of neutrality to allow for autonomy.
And really
Dr.
quick,
Green, can I just interrupt a
Yes.
minute? Mrs. Woodhouse pointed out to me in the VSBA 2025 legislative positions on page 30 under 4.3 collective bargaining, the VSBA's position is there should be no legislation which would permit or expand the authority of any school board to engage in collective bargaining, meet and confer as defined by the National Labor Relations Act and its amendments. So that's their current position.
and I also wanted to say that I think it's really important, you talked about contracts. In the position that we're currently in, our educators are still stinging from the issues that we've had with healthcare. I met with educators last night. They are still reeling. And I think if we take a strong position that is against what they perceive as their needs, we are only making ourselves more of, we're not making ourselves partners to our staff. And I want to continue to be a partner to our staff. And that's why I think it's important that we remain neutral, as Dr. Green has stated. But Mr. Andrews.
Before he speaks, Ms. Dryer wants to say
And that's
something.
all the more reason to take precaution. Bring it to the board for discussion and take a vote.
All right, Mr. Andrews, do you have a perspective that may help guide this discussion?
You have to push that button much harder than you anticipate. I'll say, obviously, I come up to the Richmond, with the perspective of the positions of the school board. One possibility in just listening to the discussion, so, obviously whatever you all decide that you would like to do, that's my job to take those positions to Richmond. Would be to potentially be broader in a perspective of, we don't want the General Assembly intervening in any way with contractual negotiations between school board and school board employees, which might be a broader position to take than just specific on collective bargaining, if that's something you wanted to do. We've also seen, just as maybe a little bit more color on some of these issues, there's been other legislation that's been introduced over the last several years that could potentially impact how employees and school boards sort of interact outside of collective bargaining as well. So, there's other things that are in this space that might be also worth considering and looking at as we kind of get through the next General Assembly session. And, we're all kind of waiting to see what happens in November in terms of the election. That can certainly change whether these things, continue to move, whether they don't continue to move, whether they shift in some manner or not. I mean, all that remains to be seen at this point.
All right, so at this point, I would like to make a recommendation to take to the full board. My recommendation is that we remain neutral so that we can have autonomy, because again, we do not want the legislator to have control over what we do contract-wise with negotiations. So I would like to maintain our neutrality and autonomy for the future.
So you want to go to the board?
Well, that would be my recommendation,
That's a
to
recommendation.
take that, our recommendation, after we see where we land with a vote in this committee, is to remain neutral and have autonomy with regards to not having the legislator enter into our contract negotiations.
I'm on board with that. That's fine. It needs to come to the board for discussion and a vote. Thank you, Alveda.
Okay, and again, the proposal that's on the table is that we remain neutral so that we may have an autonomy, and I'm basing it on what Ms. Linetti has shared and what Mr. Andrews has shared, so that our contract negotiations with staff would not be controlled by that legislator.
I respectfully would disagree that I think we should just leave it as is. Again, I don't find the necessity of bringing something to a vote for the whole board when we don't have anything specific other than keeping everything the way it currently is. So I would disagree, but that's me.
Okay, so there, Ms. Linetti, I just want to make sure I am clear. Right now, we have no reason to bring anything before the board. That's my question.
you have not taken a formal position, you've not chosen to adopt a resolution authorizing collective bargaining in Virginia Beach. That's been your position on there, on the topic. At this point, obviously you're being asked by a school board member to consider taking a more formal position. In the past, when it's been presented to you, whether you wanted to adopt regulations or policy on collective bargaining, the school board has chosen not to do so. So you've taken that position in that sense. So now the question is, do you need to do anything? One, if you want a legislative packet, that's one position on there, or do you just want a general position on collective bargaining? I'm not clear what Mr. Culpepper is looking for at that point. So you don't have to do anything, you're not required by law to do anything. So the question is, what do you as a committee recommend that the school board do?
All right, so I'm going to withdraw, based on what you just said, I'm going to withdraw my motion. And what I would like to do is that we not do anything at this point because we have no reason to do anything.
So I'm going to retract my agreement with her motion.
So is there another motion on the floor to do anything, or just the school committee's not going to take any position on it? The question is the committee going to take a formal action on Mr. Culpepper's request that the school board take a position on collective bargaining? So I don't know, Ms. Dyer, do you
That's
want
what
to?
I wanted.
So
Yes,
you might
I
need
was
to,
in agreement.
it sounds like Dr. Green has withdrawn her motion, initial motion, which wasn't seconded yet. Well, I guess it was second on yours. If you're withdrawing it and you don't want to have a motion on being neutral, there's no motion on the floor. So then, Ms. Dyer, are you looking to make a motion, or is it just the committee's not going to take action on this?
I'll make a motion that we follow up on David Culpepper's request.
Which is to take a position or to send it to the school
To
board?
take a position. I thought his request was to bring it to the board.
The email that I received from Mr. Culpepper was that we take a position.
Yes, take a position.
Then, Ms. Dyer, you might want to be the one that makes the motion as to what the position is you're requesting.
So I make a motion to take a position to vote no for collective bargaining because we cannot afford it.
You would need a second if it's going, so if you don't have a second, then there won't be any action taken by the committee.
Is there a second?
Not from me.
All right, at that point, if there's no second, then there's no action taken on that motion. And that's how we would record it in the meeting minutes. There was motion made, but no second, so there's nothing that happens at this point.
All right, thank you, Ms. Linetti. All right, the next request I received came from Mrs. Rogers with regards to us taking a position on block grant funding.
Take it away.
Yes.
Okay. So, as we've been reading in everything coming out of the Department of Education, they're talking about switching from the funding that we currently have into block grant funding. And in reading that when we receive block grant funding, it would go to the state, and then the state would give it to us. What I would like to propose is to take a position that we are going to request that the legislator not change any of our formulas, that the way that we have been paid through the federal government, should it come from the state, that we don't change that so that we don't have an interruption in our funding at this time. I would hate to have the block grant funding come from the federal government to the state. They decide, oh, well, we have to have new formulas now, and it holds up everything that we've been doing. This has been an issue getting our funding to begin with, and I would like to kind of keep it streamlined. Does this make sense?
And I'm guessing you would like something in the legislative package that
Yes.
says your position is that if it were to shift to the state funding, that the formulas essentially remain the same.
Yes. Yes. So do I need to make that motion?
if you want to have discussion about it, I don't know, then eventually you can make a motion to do that.
Okay.
If you just want to discuss the topic, you can do that now.
I would love to do that. Mr. Andros, do you have more to say on this, or could you enlighten us more on this?
Certainly. I think one of the things that I've just heard out there is, as you just mentioned, Ms. Rogers, that if the federal funding flows to the states in the block grant, I think school divisions would like to see consistency in how those dollars then flow down to the individual school divisions in a same or similar manner as they have to keep your funding consistent and reliable as they have been before. And so this is just a request to make sure that you know, the block grants are gonna flow in that manner. You just are prepared and you understand how those dollars will generally work. I think that's, is that generally what your request is?
Yes, that is what the
Mhm.
request is. Thank you. You said it much better than I
Ms.
did.
Dryer.
So this is a federal matter or state? And it's an if, right?
It
It's
is-
not definite.
Ms. Dwyer, that's exactly right. It is an if, is my understanding, and I don't always track everything as closely at the federal level, but it would be an if. So I think the request would be, if the state gets dollars in block grant, then our request would be maintain sort of the same flow of dollars to individual school divisions, so we have consistency in our funding.
But how is it related to our legislative?
Because those dollars conceivably would flow to the state, and the state would have the ability to decide how those dollars would then flow to individual school divisions.
So I guess my next argument would be, what does the bylaw say about our committee? And I have here, if not, this is not within the kind funds of the bylaw, I-28, I can read it. And the purposes of this committee, because this is a what-if case, this is a federal that hasn't even come down in through the legislation yet. And also, I don't see how it relates to our packet for today. And I just want to read the bylaw, by the way. So bylaw 128C, the committee chair shall have the responsibility for presiding over the meetings or designating another chair, committee member to preside over the chair's absence. Ensure compliance with applicable law, bylaw, policy, and regulation. And the legislative committee is responsible for the development of the school board's proposed annual legislative package. The legislative package, priorities and positions shall be based upon an input from the school board and the superintendent. The legislative committee is also responsible for developing the school board's regional legislative position for acting as school board's liaison to the Virginia General Assembly, as well as other publicly elected bodies. So how does that relate to our packet today?
So is that question redirected towards me? I'm sorry, I'm just making sure
Well, you
I mean,
can answer.
I think that is entirely up to you all to decide whether.
Thank you.
I think the place where there could potentially be state involvement in block grant funding, I think would be the idea.
So, but once again, we're in this position where we're taking a position and there is no outcome as of yet.
Ms. Dwyer, I'll go ahead and answer. Right now, we are all preparing for major shifts in our budget, both from state revenue, federal revenue, and possibly even at our local level, in order to ensure that our students are going to be secured in their resources, in their staff, and in the funding that is provided to them. I think it is wise to ensure that we are continuing to have an understanding on how we're receiving our dollars, whether or not they are coming in block grants or flowing from the federal government as they're doing now. This is not a position that would change what we've been doing. It actually is a position to maintain what we've been doing, which is exactly the same position that I took with our last topic. So what I am asking is that we request from the state that all of our funding formulas are maintained so that we can prepare to help our staff and students when it comes to budget.
That is not your job as a board member. Your job is to uphold, and especially on this committee, the bylaws.
Ms. Rogers, I'm going to ask Ms. Linetti to weigh in.
I think the way the bylaw is written there, you have the potential, because it says other political bodies on here. Now, what I'm assuming, Ms. Rogers, and you'll correct me on this, is if the block grants come through, you're asking that the General Assembly or the Virginia Department of Education, if they have an ability to affect this, and again, I don't know that we even really understand what's going to happen, that they at least maintain the current structures until we figure out what's going on.
Yes.
I don't know that we have a piece of legislation other than possibly the federal legislation coming down, but I can say I don't know that we know what's going to be the effect. My guess is you are anticipating, should it come through and the General Assembly is to take a position on it, you're going to be asking them to implement it consistent with how the current fund structure is. I'm not, again, I can't tell you that there's legislation coming down to the General Assembly at this
Right.
time. We're not aware of that, but that's a potential that could come out. But I do think the bylaw, it's generally written for the General Assembly, but it does say as well as other politically elected bodies. So if this were to be something coming through Congress, coming down, that's a potential on there. Virginia Department of Education is not an elected body, so obviously if they're putting out regulations, you would have to deal with that, but I would assume that
Right.
would have to come to the General Assembly.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right, so at this point, as with our last topic, this has not come yet before the legislature. So my recommendation is that we proceed as we did with the last topic. That at this time, no action is needed.
Can still make a motion though.
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to request in our legislative packet that should we have block grant funding, that our formulas remain the same and there is consistency in how those dollars are rolled out to our school division.
All right, all those in favor? Oh, is there a second first? I'm sorry. Is there a second?
That's okay. I take it that no one's in favor and it will not pass, which is fine.
All right. The next, other business. Is there any other business?
Dr. Green, one of the things I wanted to bring up to make sure we were clear, the legislative positions, if you want them to be finalized before you go to your December 4th General Assembly Legislative Breakfast, we'll need to get them through the school board, which require information and then action. You have 2 meetings in November. One is November 10th. Remember, that's a Monday because Veterans Day is on the Tuesday, which means our agenda materials, instead of going out on Thursday, are probably going to go out on Wednesday, which means we have to get them to the clerk probably the Tuesday before, which is somewhere in the November 3rd, November 4th time period. You are currently not scheduled for this committee to have your next meeting until November 7th, which means the agenda for the November 10th meeting would be already published without you having voted on legislative positions. Again, that would be, if November 10th, if you're aiming for it, is going to be your first information, you would not vote on it till the next meeting, which is November 24, I believe. So you might want to consider whether it's necessary for this committee to meet earlier than that to get to vote on a legislative package. Otherwise, you need to let your chair know that you will be late getting the information for the audit, for the agenda materials. It was gonna be close to begin with, but it will be, definitely late. We will have to publish out the agenda materials earlier than normal due to the holiday schedule. So that might be something, talk about when do you plan to have a draft legislative position statement or legislative agenda out, and do we need another meeting to make sure you've done that, voted on it, and to get it to the school board in time? Otherwise, what would happen is you would end up going until December. Not necessarily terrible, but it'd be hard for you to sit there and state what you want to tell your General Assembly delegation on December 4th. Just a timing issue.
All right, so, committee members, you heard, what Mrs. Linetti just suggested. I'm not a down to the wire person when we do not have to be, so my request is for your consideration to have a meeting before November 7th. Because it is gonna be important that we have our, information in the board packet in a timely manner. So if you could get out your calendars so that we can, any Friday.
I'm not
Ms. Rogers.
available on the 24th of October.
Okay. What about, that's Halloween, but okay. Right, that's so close. Okay, so,
We could get you on time to trick or treat.
all right, October 31st, no costumes that day. What about October 31st at 9:30?
That's fine.
Does that work for you, Ms. Rogers?
That's fine.
Sorry, do we need to check the availability? I'm not aware of any other committee meetings in this room that day, so it's not, yeah. Do you want to, Ms. Madsen, do you want to go check with Ms. Toniata? Dr. Green, while I'm looking back in there, I've had a note, I'm not sure we ever actually adopted the agenda for this meeting when we started AEO, so we may have to retroactively adopt your agenda for this meeting, so I didn't catch that.
Thank you.
Before we do that, though, are we then going to be meeting both on the 31st and the 7th, or are we moving the 7th to the 31st?
I would recommend that we be moving it, because you wouldn't need to have two
That's why I'm
meetings
asking.
back to back that close.
Yeah, I'm not, once you adopt the agenda, what you have to do for the December 4th meeting, Ms. Mattson and Ms. Woodhouse will pretty much will manage the arrangements for that. So I don't know, unless you have another reason you have to do, once you've completed that legislation.
No, I just, I have to keep I have two jobs, and I'm a parent and a volunteer. I just have to keep my calendar pretty tight. So the 7th would be moved to the 31st. We would not be.
I don't know that I don't think you have to have the November 7th meeting. Now, obviously, once we get into the General Assembly meeting, bills coming in, there might be more reason for you to have reason, but I would think between October 31st and December 4th, there may not be a lot for you to do.
Got it.
All right, so we're good for the 31st. All right, before we do, make the change there, may I have a motion that we retroactively adopt today's meeting agenda, for the Legislative Committee?
So moved.
I'll second that, but I just want it noted and on the record, my stand on the items C and D on the new business.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, next item, October 31st. I'm making a motion that we meet on October 31st at 9:30 a.m. in lieu of November 7th, so that we may finalize our legislative packet.
So
A
moved.
second. So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so our next meeting, will be October 31st at 9:30 a.m. Do we have any other business? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, ladies. And thank you, staff.